بسم الله الأمن الأقدس اللهم صل على نقطة البيان ومن آمن به بعزة وجلال. Well, I'm here again with my brother, Sam Burch. We did, as people remember, the podcast while back in May of last year in 2019 when he came to visit me after the tragic passing of Roya. And we have gotten together again since I have come down under, and this will be our second podcast on the day before Invasion Day. So, Sam, how are you doing?
Doing well, doing well. It's a very solemn week prior to, as you mentioned, to Invasion Day. I'd like to begin our conversation by acknowledging the traditional owners of the country and the land on which we're talking to you and having this conversation from, the Jagera and the Turrbal people, and of course pay our respects to ancestors and elders past, present and emerging, and of course extend that same acknowledgement and respect to all of the surrounding clans and tribes and nations across this continent.
As well as all traditional nations and indigenous nations throughout this planet as a whole. Because our struggle, the struggle of the Fāṭimīya Sufi Order, the people of the Bayān, is the struggle of indigeneity against the forces that are against it. And it is interesting how this has all come together in this time, where really, the forces of capitalism, neoliberal global capitalism, represent the forces of darkness. And it is those forces of decolonization and indigeneity that are the people pushing back against this Ahriman in this day. And this Ahriman also extends to these various trolls and criminals online that have been entangled with me for quite a long time, almost 2 decades now. And these people have been relentless recently, and have been keeping people abreast of their activities and whatnot. But we found out about a local connection, one that lives on the Gold Coast, or is visiting the Gold Coast presently, that has not just a connection to the lobby down under, but also is a Baha'i, a card-carrying Baha'i. And once again, this proves my contention that all of these attacks and all of this defamation campaigns that began, that went into another level back in 2016, although it had been ongoing for 2 decades before that, has the Baha'is, the Hyphen Baha'i organization, behind it. I should mention here, because these trolls keep thinking that I live on the Gold Coast. I do not live on the Gold Coast. I am not going to reveal where I actually live, but I am not on the Gold Coast. In fact, I am almost 70 kilometers in distance from the Gold Coast. I am in Queensland, but not on the Gold Coast. And in fact, I have not been living on the Gold Coast since I came back to Australia. Indeed, I went and visited a family member during the Christmas holidays. Not that it is any of the business of these surveillance hacks, but the fact of the matter is, and as Sam can also testify, that I have not been living on the Gold Coast, and I do not live now on the Gold Coast. Isn't that right, Sam?
Absolutely, yeah. And look, just for anyone who isn't aware of the ongoing attention being paid to all of these matters, not only have I been following all of this for the length of our relationship, which is now coming up to 15 years, but of course, myself and the other members of the Fāṭimīya Sufi Order and the Bayānī community are well aware of the reality of these matters in the real world, and not just in this kind of online environment where all of these hacks, trolling, defamation and criminal activity are currently being played out.
Indeed, indeed. So these people are unnoticed, that there are many eyes watching. I may be responding to them, but the fact of the matter is that there are many eyes watching them. And everybody is in agreement, including a branch of German law enforcement, that these people are engaging in outright criminal activity. So they are on notice, and as is their friend who is currently visiting the Gold Coast, if they get any big ideas, that there are still laws in this country, in Australia, and there are good law enforcement people in this country as well. We may have our differences on ideological grounds with some of these people, but on the personal level, a lot of these people are actually good, awesome people Those ones that look at these issues will agree very fast that we are dealing with international criminals, that these people are indeed criminals. And as I have gone on record saying on numerous occasions, that I am putting the responsibility for the demise, the murder of my wife, Fāṭimīya Azal, firmly at the feet of these individuals. So I am once again underscoring the fact that Mr. Dennis Giron and his sidekick, Nate Abukir, are in fact accessories to the murder of my wife. I'll hand it back to you, Sam.
Yes, and just to send a very clear message to those people, and again, to all of the people listening to this. When one member of the Fāṭimīya is attacked, has been defamed, and, as you just mentioned, has been murdered, this is a matter, of course, for the entire membership of the Fāṭimīya. Let me make this very clear. As we mentioned, tomorrow is Invasion Day. In the narrative of contemporary so-called Australia, this represents Australia Day, the 26th of January, and it is celebrated annually as a holiday. And it is supposed to represent all the things that Australia makes itself out to be a multicultural, inclusive society, to be a country of justice and fairness, to be inclusive and respectful. Now, this day was the day, 26th of January, of the anniversary of the landing of the first fleet of British ships in Port Jackson in New South Wales, and the raising of the flag of Great Britain in Sydney Cove by Governor Arthur Phillip. This day is a day of mourning. I do not speak, of course, for all Aboriginal peoples, because Aboriginal peoples and First Nations peoples in this country have a diversity of opinions about this. But those with whom we are aligned, and I mean we, the Fāṭimīya Sufi Order, are aligned, for them, this is a day of mourning. And for all those First Nations people here who believe in the unceded sovereignty of these lands and the ongoing fight for self-determination and the exercising of the rights associated with that sovereignty, this is a day of great sadness, because it represents the beginning of a genocide, the beginning of an ecocide, the beginning of massacres, the beginning of the removal of the rights that go back tens of thousands of years. It begins the dismantling of the spiritual life, the relationship system, the division of families, the killing of women and children, the rape of women and children, and the ongoing oppression and violence, personal, systemic, that First Nations people here encounter every single day of their lives. Although there was an apology issued a number of years ago to the so-called stolen generations of Aboriginal children who were forcibly removed from their homes by government and religious authorities, this is a situation which continues systemically today. The number of deaths in custody in this country is sickening, is criminal in and of itself. The systemic economic disparity and the ongoing oppression and limitation of rightful access to any of the resources in this country.
Sorry to interrupt, but all facilitated by the ongoing ecocide
absolutely
of the system, of the colonial system that just witnessed one of the worst, most catastrophic bushfire seasons in recorded memory, that according to certain scientists has seen the elimination and the deaths of over 500 million animals in this country. I mean, this is unconscionable. This is a country where the ruling party of the land And the prime minister of the land continues to deny the reality of climate change.
Absolutely.
Even though these things are going on right
Absolutely.
in front of him.
The koala is on the brink of functional extinction. And the amount of species that face the same threat is incalculable. The ongoing threat from mining and resources. And again, the inequitable access to any of the benefits of these and the divide and conquer strategies used by colonial corporate powers to divide Aboriginal peoples and communities and set them against each other are but just a few of the litany of crimes that continue in this country, which is still under a system that is white supremacist.
Yeah.
And just to clarify once again, Australia, so-called Australia, I should say, which originally composed of at least 500 separate yet connected First Nations, in the absence of any formal treaty with these First Nations, is still in an ongoing state of violent occupation.
And this is what needs to be underscored here, is that whereas for example, in North America and even parts of South America, there were treaties, albeit, these treaties were disingenuously made by the colonial powers. But here in Terra Australis, there was never a treaty. No colonial power ever offered a treaty to any indigenous group, nation, at any time. Until, even we can say with Mabo, that overturned this doctrine of terra nullius, upon which, the British colonial powers pretty much did whatever they wanted here. But even post-Mabo, there has yet to be any formal treaty offered by the governing powers of the land, the governing colonial powers of the land, to these indigenous people. And this needs to be, we know about the reality of colonialism throughout the world, right? But here in Australia, in a culture that I would argue, and many scientists are arguing, and many anthropologists are arguing, is perhaps the most ancient, the oldest continuous culture on the planet. That, in a country like this, that for a governing colonial power that has only been here for 10, 20, 30 years or so, to not even offer a treaty to the indigenous nations of this land is unconscionable, right?
Unconscionable and completely calculated.
Of course, yes.
Of course, as the entire colonial, imperialist, and now corporate system is, because as we've said before, the Australian economy is built on a house of cards that is based upon this lie, and it is so dangerous to the status quo here.
Yeah. As somebody, a good friend of mine, in fact, Muhammad Ali Khalil, I don't think you'll mind me quoting him, has been saying to me for a few years now, the Australian economy right now, which is fueled primarily by a housing market or housing bubble, is one of the greatest Ponzi schemes on the planet. And sooner or later, this bubble will go pop.
Absolutely.
And once it does, the middle class in this country, the petit bourgeois, the small shopkeepers, etc., are the ones that will be wiped out.
Yeah.
Completely. So go ahead. Go ahead.
if we bring this all back to the question, which we're also discussing here at the moment, why are we talking about this? Well, you introduced this very eloquently at the beginning of our conversation here, but why we, the members of the Fāṭimīya Sufi Order, why are we defending this position? Well, let me make this very clear. This is where our allegiance is. Though we came from overseas, born overseas, our allegiance, as it has developed, in reality, not just in the online reality.
Not in the online LARPing reality that these trolls inhabit, in the delusion of LARPistan.
Yeah. That
people like Nate Abukira and definitely Mr. Dennis Kiran are saturated with in the real world, in the three-dimensional spatio-temporal world. Go ahead.
Yeah. And so our relationship to this land and its people has developed over the years in such a way that we are now connected here. As I talked about briefly in the last conversation that we had, I am related through kinship and adoption to both the Yolngu peoples, Warramiri clan, kinship Bulinyi, through initiation and skin group to Yallinga and Walpuri, and my extended family come from many different nations. That is through the law, and that is through the kinship system here. These are things which I personally, and of course we, treat with the utmost respect,
absolutely, with
the utmost sincerity, with the utmost seriousness in terms of our honouring of that. As I also mentioned in our last conversation, myself, other members of my family, members of the Fāṭimīya, have also been involved with the Brisbane Aboriginal Sovereign Embassy since its inception. Now, we have been there in solidarity, support and allegiance. And so we have been incredibly fortunate, and these relationships have been incredibly important to us, and we are grateful to the land and its people. And we walk in absolute real-time solidarity and allegiance. That law is the one which we also follow.
That's right.
So the law, and when in that regard, our laws are obviously the laws of the Bayān,
yes,
and the commandments therein,
yeah,
the regulations, rules, and the laws of the Fāṭimīya Sufi Order,
yeah,
and also those that we follow through our kinship and law relationships on this country.
And I should mention that at some point we will have this discussion more extensively, because there is a interesting coalescence between the Aboriginal law of Australia and the tenets of the Bayān.
Absolutely.
Even, I would say even more so than Islam. But with where the Bayān is concerned, when one listens to how the Aboriginal law, the traditional Aboriginal law, is explained, it is almost as if one is reading the Persian Bayān. And this is why, people, a lot of the native people here have been very interested, and it's been very quaint to them that such an articulation in a revelatory setting actually occurred in a country like Iran. And this is one of the reasons why the Fāṭimīya, first of all, sprang on this land, and also why it is growing on this land. I should mention again, I will underscore this again, because I have said this many times, and to people who've also written to me privately. Currently, we hold a no Americans in the Fāṭimīya Sufi Order policy, strictly. Now, that policy excludes Native Americans, it excludes African Americans, and includes any white American who is in solidarity, in genuine, sincere solidarity with either African American causes or Native American causes. But I will be straight up, white Anglo-American WASPs or Ashkenazi Jews are not welcome in this Fāṭimīya Sufi Order. I have said this from the beginning, and I will say this until the end. This is our policy. Unless these individuals can demonstrate otherwise, we don't want them here. So when people like Abu Kira or Giron keep harping on and LARPing on about, the one-man shows, and now they've changed their narrative to the two-man shows.
Yeah.
Perhaps they should understand that we have from the beginning not been interested in the American crowd at all. We do not want to set up a base in the United States. There is a white American gentleman, an ex-Baha'i, who has formally taken Bayat with me. And he is welcome, and because I have known this individual for years, we interacted with him, and he's an ex-Baha'i. There's another individual who is also a white American individual who is a moheb. He's a close individual to the Fāṭimīya Sufi Order and the Bayānīs, but he's not an initiate. So, we are not inflexible in that regard. What counts for us is sincerity. Unfortunately, the vast majority of white Americans, right, and especially the American male, above all, not so much the American woman, it seems to inhabit a space where everything to him is a product, right? And this individual, like exemplified in the characters of Nate Abukira and Dennis Giron, believe that they have a right and entitlement to the beliefs of everybody on this planet. They have a right and belief to either belong to it, to own it, to possess it, or to ridicule and mock it. And this is why we don't want these people with us. You know, that is the unfortunate consequence of the toxic colonial culture of North America and the United States specifically, where you have, you know, Mr. Donald Trump as your leader. And in the eternal words of Montesquieu, you know, every leader is a reflection of its people. So the vast majority of Americans who voted for this clown really reflect, and this guy projects that reality onto them. So what I wanted to say, we have at no point wanted to have a presence in the United States and among Americans. And this policy will remain in place as long as necessary, unless, you know, it is demonstrated otherwise that this policy, you know, needs to change. Now, African Americans and Native Americans who want to join the Fāṭimīya Sufi Order are more than welcome. We will roll out the red carpet for every last one of these people. But, you know, like I said, the white American, the WASP male, and the Ashkenazi Jewish male are not welcome in this order, unless they can demonstrate that they are not part of that toxic troll, duplicitous, disingenuous corporate ontology that inhabits the internet and Facebook, especially and particularly the circles that Mr. Nate Abukira and Dennis Giron congregate around. So we don't want you. We have never wanted you. We don't want your friends. We don't want your acquaintances. You've never been welcome with us. So if you're trying to counter my influence because you're worried that, you know, we're trying to recruit amongst your people, we have never at any time been interested in recruiting anybody. I even said that to your friend, Mr. Nate Abukira, Kotha Rahmani, way at the beginning when she was constantly knocking at my door, that, you know, that we had a problem with Americans, and that we didn't want white Americans in the Fāṭimīya Sufi Order. So you can take that back, and you can take that to the bank. I'll let you continue, Sam.
Yeah, and look, this is exactly as you said. This is about a fundamental clash of value systems here.
Absolutely.
You know, the value system that we adhere to, that we support, does not commodify people. Mm-hmm.
Or beliefs, and especially belief systems.
Belief systems, yeah. And some sort of commodification also by some sort of numbers game of consensus belief. Mm. It does not commodify the sacred. Mm.
And does not or approach it in a utilitarian way where it wants to use different communities of different belief systems in a greater both control and weaponization of these communities against the enemies of the quote-unquote lobby or the empire as itself.
Absolutely, absolutely, you know. And why there has been the finding also of a spiritual home for the Fāṭimīya here is because here you have also had a continuous civilization comprised of many different nations as well, who have over their 60,000+ year history cycled through many cycles of laws, of dreamings, of practices, united by underlying laws as well. But the underlying laws that comprise the value system completely reject greed and the commodification of the environment, the using of people as political objects in a struggle, which this is as well. And so the attack on the Fāṭimīya and its members is an attack on the value system that this represents, that we fight for, that we struggle for, in reality, on the streets, in our relationships, with our families. And the proof there is in the reality of that. Mm.
Absolutely. 100%.
Not in this LARPing make-believe universe that these trolls, corporate hacks, engaging in this criminal behavior inhabit.
That's right. That's right. And on that note, because there is going to be Invasion Day tomorrow and a big rally here, we will leave it on that note and make probably another podcast during the week together, kind of reporting on the post-Invasion Day occurrences and events. So with that, I bid everybody goodbye. لا حجة إلى ألين قبل نبيل.